Hey everybody, it's Tom coming to you day 9 of our series where we are endeavoring to render some definition, or at least some approach to definition of crucial terms in the public discourse. The pair of terms which we're going to take up today is the left versus the right on the political spectrum, and what is really happening with that distinction. It's very, I think, salutary to allow ourselves to be informed by its origin, which was in the French Revolution around 1789, wherein the National Assembly sort of was divided along two lines. There were those who wanted to support l'ancien régime, or the monarchy and the aristocracy, and that other way of doing things which had been historically ascended, which can be sort of roughly encapsulated in the word feudalism. And there were those who wanted to end the reliance on that system of class division and of deference to authority and appeal to divine right, and so on and so forth. And those who favor the monarchy would sit on the right side of the assembly, and those who were for the revolution and for radical democratism would sit on the left. And as the events, unfolded, there would be variation. But this basic breakdown between left and right came to obtain a certain currency which is held through the present day. And initially, in a relatively straightforward way, the focus was a political focus and a desire on the part of the left to propagate democracy as the ideal form of political organization. Radical democracy, not merely a representative democracy. It's an important distinction, because with a representative democratic framework, you actually create a buffer which enables an intermediate class to emerge and to insulate the government from the actual inclinations of the people, both as individuals and as the people en masse, abstracting for the moment from class distinction. But that abstraction, of course, is hardly tenable as long as one is ensconced in a society where there are gross maldistributions of material and more sort of immaterial power and wealth. So much for the origin. What would happen subsequently over the 19th century is that onto this political claim there emerged a deepening appreciation of the fact that a mere political form was inadequate to attain the ideals which had inspired the left in the first place. Famously, there's the French slogan, liberté, égalité, fraternité, right? Liberty, equality, fraternity. That we may sort of, instead of using the word fraternity, maybe, there's no real nice correlate, right? There's fraternity and sorority, but the idea is human solidarity, or simply solidarity. These were the underpinnings of the project which was embodied in the French Revolution, and in some measure in the American Revolution as well. It became evident that what had to transpire was a reorientation of society's economic framework, because the political format, even if it was preferable to an outrightly monarchical or feudal one, still was not adequate to bring about this ideal of liberty and equality and human solidarity, because the material conditions which had been inherited both from feudalism and the newly ascended capitalism were incompatible with what was practically necessary in order to realize those ideals. And there's a great deal of searching as to what would constitute a renovation in that positive direction, foreshadowed by utopian thinkers in England, somebody like Owen. There's several people in France or people in America. Eventually, though, the voice of people like Karl Marx exercised a powerful influence in recognizing that it was the format of the commodity and the broad-based commodification of society that was underwriting this class division in a manner that was, if things were just to proceed as they were, more or less insuperable. So you had to reject the capitalist form in one way or the other. And there were different people and different approaches to how this could, emerge. There were the anarchists, the socialists, the communists, and by communism, what was really meant was the slogan, from each according to his abilities and to each according to their needs. And there was a decoupling of a relationship between whatever labor an individual happened to be put forth and their access to what was necessary for a fulfilled life. The right, by contrast, originally those who were, apologists for monarchy and feudalism, were also apologists, historically, for the dominant economic order. And it may not be flattering, but it's just a historical circumstance that the right has always defended the privileges of the privileged. And usually they sort of mask that defense or that apology in advance of certain theses, some of which would be that a class division of society is something which is desirable, or the weight and wisdom of tradition is something by virtue of its very sort of provenance should be given a certain cachet, or that the probity and order and stability are more important than freedom. And at the background of these kinds of positionalities is a particular vision of who and what we are as human beings. And it's generally a rather dark, a rather pessimistic vision. By contrast, the left has a vision of human beings as capable of interacting with the world in a positive, forward way with each other and with nature itself. In the 20th century, events would sully the conversation, and the perfidious influence of Stalinism sort of marred the reputation of the left by aligning it with a totalitarian framework. Because that's what was happening in the Soviet Union. And we're going to abstract from the actual revolution of 1917 and events there around, which were in embryo potentially very positive, but they were hijacked, in my view. And the true leftism, which had emerged from the French Revolution, or not, that's just a convenient point of departure, because that's where the distinction in language literally originates. These divides can, be drawn back further into history. But, what happened there with Stalinism sullied the reputation of the left, and bolstered what I would call mere liberalism, which is a kind of restrained conservatism that believes that we can retain conventions like that of the market as long as we mitigate them by employing the state apparatus in an appropriate way, and this is what you find with people like John Maynard Keynes, who kind of provided a theoretical grounding for the New Deal. That's a gross simplification, but it's adequate for our present purpose, which is just to give a rough sketch of how, at least in America, the left started to become associated with the Democratic Party and was then sort of domesticated in process. We also see that with the dilution of union militancy. It's often forgotten that the conditions of possibility which obtained to enable the New Deal and to enable the thriving state of labor beyond the 40s and the 50s and the 60s and so forth was in fact incredibly radical movements here in the US that were explicitly, openly communist, socialist, anarchist in character, but which were brutally and aggressively suppressed under Woodrow Wilson and subsequently with McCarthy and the so-called Red Scares and appeal to propaganda in the Cold War and all the rest of it. And the tragic consequence of that history is that we're now at a point where it is asserted that capitalism is just here to stay. And there's the thinker Slavoj Žižek, some of you guys might have heard of him, who has sort of famously asserted it's easier to imagine the end of the world than it is to imagine the end of capitalism, which is of course a rather unfortunate impasse in which to find ourselves. Now, all this is to say then that from where I stand, the left represents the heritage of a revolutionary vision that emphasizes freedom and equality and human solidarity in a way that that frankly cannot be sustained by reliance on an overwhelming economicism, if you like. Sort of made that a word up, right? But you don't receive there are two other additional points of emphasis I'd like to append here, right? The one is that alongside with all that we've talked about in terms of the political and economic reform, there are other features of the deep left historically that should be recalled. Two in particular would be that it was fundamentally international in character. There's an incommensurability between these values that we've sketched and a focus on mere local or provincial set of political questions or what have you. The vision, even as it manifests locally, has to have a sense of what's going on internationally, across the globe. That is undertaken with respect to cultural difference, but it always has the human denominator in the background. The other thing I'm going to add is that the left is not, is sometimes sort of sketched as a kind of implicitly anti-technological orientation. But this really is a lamentable imprecision. It's not that the left is anti-technology. It's rather that there is a recognition that the technological forms upon which we are currently reliant are not consonant with a society that is truly fulfilling. And so what we need to do is transform those technologies so that they can realize greater alignment with the society that's truly fulfilling. And one of the things that needs to be affected in that process is the decoupling of individual labor contribution from access to the fruits of society at large. Because until you have that sort of decoupling, the linkage becomes the predicate of inequality. Well, I think that about sums it up. at least to get the ball rolling. I'm not going to pretend that I've been particularly flattering to the right, because I don't have a particularly happy view of the right. But of course, I welcome constructive dissent from my position. But I will not be inauthentic, as it were. And I guess the real upshot, the real thing at which I'm driving, is that an appreciation of the deeper values of the left and the right, for that matter, sort of expose both the Democratic and Republican parties as being comically distant from any serious commitment to the philosophical ground which originates in the 18th century, and really before the 18th century, but we're just going to sort of retain the convention of that time as a point of departure. And so it's almost, they're almost beneath the dignity of classification in that frame. Anyway, guys, that's all for today. Tomorrow, we're going to take up the notion, or we're going to strive to take up the notion, anyway, of power. And there's one other word which I want to take up. I may do that in tandem with power, or may do a separate video, which still is, I think, quite crucial. And that word is love. So those are the two remaining videos that we're going to put in this particular series, insofar as we're going to, bookend it as 11 episodes. Clearly, the project which is implicit in it extends beyond 11 terms, but that's maybe a good first chapter. All right. Well, hopefully I'll see you all tomorrow, and have a lovely evening.